Recently, we ran a poll on the channel asking which F1 engine you thought was the best. Well over 22,000 of you voted, and a huge 48% of you said you loved the V10 the most. So we started to ask ourselves, what would happen if the current cars were allowed to use V10 engines? Just as a warning, this is going to get a little ridiculous. Honestly, when you listen to the sound the V10 engines made, it's no surprise that they're remembered so fondly. It's a sound that everyone thinks of when you imagine an F1 car going by. The high-pitched scream is unlike anything else an F1 car has ever produced. The noise makes the cars seem even faster than they were. The specific engines we're going to look at are the 2000 to 2005 3-litre V10 engines. Teams were using V10s for years before then, but from the year 2000, the FIA decided that the teams had to use a 3-litre V10. Before then, they were allowed to go up to a V12, but no team had bothered with the extra 2 cylinders since 1997. The year 2000 season was actually the first time that the FIA said to teams, this is the exact engine we want you to use. Prior to that season, teams were given an engine capacity they had to adhere to, but were free to use almost any configuration of cylinders they wanted to. Before we can look at what those V10 engines would do to a modern-day F1 car, we need to talk about what the engines themselves could actually achieve. From 1998 to 2000, it was Mercedes' V10 power that ruled, giving Mika Häkkinen 2 world championships. The 1999 McLaren MP414 produced between 785 and 810 horsepower at 17,000 RPM. To give you a comparison to that, the current 1.6-litre V6s produce about 1,000 horsepower at 10,000 RPM. BMW's P83 engine used in the 2003 season managed an impressive 19,200 RPM and cleared the 900 brake horsepower mark at around 940 brake horsepower and weighed less than 91 kilograms. The current spec of F1 engines weigh around 145 kilograms. In 2005, the Honda engine did apparently break the 1,000 horsepower mark, but was limited to help with reliability. Looking at these figures, the 3-litre V10s weren't actually more powerful than the current spec of engine. But that was 20 years ago, and times have changed since then. For the sake of this though, we aren't updating the V10 engine, because it's that sound that we all love so much. There is going to be some guesstimation coming up, so don't at me in the comments section. Remember, everything is hypothetical. We're just dreaming about hearing those V10s every weekend again. Let's start off by working out how to get the engine in the car before we even think about how fast we can go. First of all, those V10 engines were huge compared to modern V6s. The new engines are nice and small, able to squeeze in behind the driver and let the teams make the sleekest looking car possible. Just look at Mercedes' current car, the W13. The space behind Lewis and George is tiny, and there are no side pod design shows it off perfectly. In the early part of the millennium, the cars had a much bigger rear to help house all those extra cylinders. So to make space, we're going to have to rip apart everyone's beautiful aero design. On top of that, we're going to need a huge fuel tank to go with our huge engine. Back in 2005, teams would refuel their cars throughout the race. One advantage of this was that they didn't have to carry huge amounts of fuel at the start of the race. The current minimum weight limit of 798 kilograms does not include the fuel that goes into the car. Currently, an F1 car can carry up to 110 kilograms of fuel. The teams will obviously try to get that figure lower if they can, as the less weight they have, the faster they go. We need to be able to hold enough fuel to run our 3-litre V10 though, so at a rough guess, we need to double the size of the fuel tank. And our car is going to weigh an extra 110 kilograms on top of what the current 1.6-litre V6 would. Let's say we aren't going to change the wheelbase, or width, or any of that. We're just going to find space for the 2005 engine in a current car. The car is going to look like some sort of bloated spider with a massive abdomen. It's going to be ridiculous. But if you close your eyes and ignore how ugly it might be, it will sound beautiful. Yeah, that noise never gets old. Anyway, while our car may have a bigger backside than Kim Kardashian, it is going to be a hell of a lot heavier because of it. Let's say before we put our V10 engine in, our car weighs exactly the 798 kilograms that every F1 team wants their car to weigh at the moment. That weight limit does not include fuel. The current F1 fuel tank holds up to 110 kilograms of weight. So at the start of a race, a 1.6 litre V6 F1 car currently weighs around 908 kilograms. We have an engine that's almost twice as big though, and we're carrying twice as much fuel. That means our car weighs 1,018 kilograms. That's almost twice as heavy as the car would have been in 2005. Something about this is starting to make me think our car might struggle. It's time for some of what we call in England pub maths. It's the kind of maths you do when you're out having a few drinks with your friends and you're arguing over something stupid like how fast a current F1 car would go if it had a 2005 V10 engine in it. It's not scientific and it's not based on logic, but it is easy enough to do on a napkin. So in Bahrain, Sergio Perez managed to hit a top speed of 323.2 kilometers an hour. But our theoretical car is carrying an extra 110 kilograms. That's an extra 12.1% of weight. Well, 12.1% more weight means we're going to go 12.1% slower. Probably. Anyway, if we're going 12.1% slower, it means Perez's top speed would have been 208.09 kilometers an hour. That is quite a bit slower actually. All that extra weight is making a massive difference to how fast we can go, and we've destroyed the aero design of the car as well. Of course, our car does now sound like this. So honestly, who cares? Obviously, if we saw the return of V10 engines in F1, the cars would look nothing like the modern F1 cars. The car design regulations would need to be completely overhauled to allow space for the larger engines and fuel tanks. Weight limits would have to be changed, and with the modern electrical technology that F1 cars have, who knows how powerful they would get. Obviously, the reason that none of the cars on the grid at the moment are using a V10 engine is because they aren't allowed. The FIA gives the team strict technical specifications that they have to adhere to when designing or buying their engines. In 2006, the engine specification changed to a 2.8-litre V8 to help reduce the power F1 cars could produce. The FIA are constantly looking for ways to improve safety in the sport, and decreasing the car's speeds is an easy way of doing that. One of the aims for the 2022 specifications was actually to decrease the speeds to help improve safety again. Of course, a 2.8-litre V8 is a long way removed from the current spec engine. The engine specifications changed again in 2014 and brought around the end of the roaring F1 cars of old. The main aim for the changes was to reduce carbon emissions and build an engine that was more efficient and more powerful than those used in the past. At the time, F1 was under a huge amount of pressure from climate activists, and with climate change becoming a bigger issue in the public eye, the sport had to make a change. Since then, F1 has committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The current 1.6-litre V6s with the E10 fuel are only the second step in that process. The 2026 season will see the next change for F1 engines. These engines will run 100% sustainable fuel and have a much larger electrical component than the current cars. It isn't going to be Formula E though, so don't worry. Because of this drive to improve sustainability and reduce the sport's impact on the environment, it's unlikely we'll ever see the return of the V10 engines that made the early 2000s such a memorable time for so many fans. The good news is that the 2026 engines are meant to rev much higher than the current ones, which should improve the sound they make. Or at least that's what the FIA says. Are they ever going to sound like this though? Probably not. I guess all that's left to do is daydream about those old V10 F1 cars.